The twin suns of Corrigan IV cast long purple shadows across the training grounds of the Skyran Citadel. Commander Lexa Voran moved with practiced precision through the ranks of her warriors, her critical gaze missing nothing. The young recruits, all female, as was the way of the Skyran, stood at rigid attention, their copper-toned skin glistening with exertion from the day's combat drills. "Pathetic," Lexa muttered, pausing before a recruit whose stance betrayed fatigue. 18 cycles of training, and you still drop your guard when tired. The Void Horde would have your spine as a trophy within moments. The recruit, Taria was her name, stiffened, but kept her gaze forward. "It won't happen again, Commander." "No," Lexa agreed coldly. "It won't." She moved on, leaving the unspoken threat hanging in the air. Among the Skyren, failure was not tolerated. 3 strikes, and a warrior was reassigned to the lower castes, their family name forever tarnished. At the edge of the training grounds, Lexa noticed First Lieutenant Kara reviewing tactical displays with her elite squad. They were her best, veterans of countless campaigns across the star systems of the Outer Rim. Kara noticed her approach and straightened, striking her chest twice in the traditional Skyran salute. "Commander," she acknowledged, her voice measured. "We've received new intelligence from the border outpost in the Cressida system." Lexa took the holographic data sphere Kara offered, scanning its contents with narrowed eyes. "Another Void Horde incursion?" "No, Commander, something unusual." Kara hesitated, something Lexa had rarely witnessed from her most steadfast officer. A lone vessel of unknown design engaged a Horde war party, 8 vessels, heavily armed. They were raiding the mining colony on Cressida II. Lexa's golden eyes narrowed. "And?" "The unknown vessel destroyed all 8. Single-handedly. No casualties reported on the colony." Murmurs rippled through the gathered warriors. 8 Void Horde vessels represented a significant battle group, something that would typically require at least a small fleet to engage. For a single ship to prevail seemed impossible. "The vessel's commander made contact with the colony afterward," Kara continued. "They say it was a human." The murmurs escalated to outright exclamations of disbelief. Humans were known to the Skyran, of course, one of many lesser species encountered in their centuries of interstellar dominance. But humans were traders, colonists, and occasionally useful diplomatic assets. They were not warriors. "Preposterous," declared Saren, Kara's second-in-command, a battle-scarred veteran with crimson streaks in her silver-white hair. "Humans can barely survive in half-standard gravity. Their bones break easily, their reflexes are sluggish, and their strategic capabilities are rudimentary at best." Lexa studied the data, frowning. "The colony's records confirm it. The vessel is registered to a human called Marcus Vane." She almost stumbled over the strange name. "He's apparently a mercenary, operates alone." "1 human against 8 Horde vessels?" Saren scoffed. "The colonists are mistaken, or lying to cover their own incompetence." Lexa zoomed in on grainy footage captured by the colony's defense systems. The vessel was sleek, oddly asymmetrical in a way that defied Skyran aesthetics, but undeniably built for combat. Its hull bore the scars of countless battles, patches of mismatched armor plating suggesting frequent repairs. "The ship's designation is Nemesis," she read aloud. "According to colonial records, this human has operated in the Outer Rim for nearly a decade." "There are stories." "What kind of stories?" asked Kara, her professional curiosity piqued. Lexa scrolled through the data, her expression growing increasingly troubled. "Reports of a lone mercenary turning the tide in several border conflicts. Pirate strongholds found abandoned or destroyed. Rescue operations deemed impossible somehow completed successfully." She looked up, meeting Kara's gaze. "If even half of these accounts are accurate." "They cannot be," Saren interrupted. "Humans are not capable of such feats." Lexa closed the holographic display with a sharp gesture. "Perhaps, but the High Council is sufficiently intrigued that they've ordered us to investigate. This human is currently en route to the trading hub at Nexus Station. We will rendezvous there and assess the situation." "You can't be serious, Commander," Saren protested. Diverting an elite Skyran unit to chase rumors about a human? Lexa's golden eyes flashed dangerously. The High Council's orders are not subject to debate, Lieutenant Saren. Prepare the scimitar for immediate departure. First squad only, we travel light. As the warriors dispersed to prepare for the mission, Kara lingered behind. Commander, she said quietly, in all my years serving with you, I've never seen you so interested in an outsider. Lexa's expression remained impassive, but something flickered behind her eyes. The Void Horde grows bolder by the day, Kara. Our forces are stretched thin defending a dozen fronts. If there is even the slightest chance this human possesses tactical knowledge or technology that could aid us. Of course, Commander. Kara nodded, though her expression suggested she wasn't entirely convinced. For the glory of the Skyran. For survival, Lexa corrected quietly, turning away to prepare for the journey ahead. Nexus Station hung in the void like a massive mechanical spider, its 8 great arms extending from a central hub, each housing different sectors catering to the countless species that used the station as a trading post. Unlike the elegant organic curves of Skyran architecture, Nexus was a patchwork of designs accreted over centuries, practical, chaotic, and teeming with life. The Skyran delegation, consisting of Commander Lexa, Lieutenant Kara, and 6 elite warriors, moved through the crowded corridors with practiced discipline. Their presence caused an immediate reaction, crowds parting, conversations hushing, eyes following their progress with a mixture of fear and respect. The Skyran were not common visitors to trade hubs, and their reputation as the galaxy's premier warrior culture preceded them. This place reeks of weakness, muttered Saren, her hand never straying far from her pulse blade. How do humans bear to live in such disorder? Observe and learn, Lieutenant, Lexa replied evenly. Different does not always mean inferior. They reached their destination, a cantina called the Event Horizon, reportedly a frequent haunt of freelance ship captains and mercenaries. As they entered, the cacophony of a dozen alien languages and the clinking of glasses momentarily faltered. Spread out, Lexa ordered quietly. Observe, but do not engage unless necessary. The warriors dispersed, taking strategic positions throughout the establishment. Lexa and Kara approached the bar, where a 4-armed Jaxian bartender eyed them warily. We seek information on a human, Lexa stated without preamble. Marcus Vane, captain of the Nemesis. The bartender's upper set of arms continued polishing glasses, while the lower pair remained suspiciously still. Information costs, even for the mighty Skyran. Lexa placed a small crystalline cube on the counter, worth more than the bartender would likely earn in a month. We merely wish to speak with him. The Jaxian's compound eyes shifted, surveying the room before leaning forward. Vane keeps to himself, not the sociable type. But he's here, back corner table, facing the entrance. The bartender tilted his head subtly, indicating a shadowed alcove. Lexa turned, her enhanced vision penetrating the dimness. A solitary figure sat with his back to the wall, a half-empty glass before him. He was clothed simply, dark utilitarian garments that wouldn't restrict movement, worn combat boots, and a weathered jacket with numerous concealed pockets that undoubtedly contained weapons. His face was partially obscured by several days' growth of beard, and a ragged scar ran from his right temple down his cheek. Most striking were his eyes, a pale blue that seemed to glow in the dim light, constantly scanning the room with calculated awareness. Those eyes now fixed directly on Lexa, recognizing her scrutiny immediately. He spotted us, Kara murmured unnecessarily. Of course he has, Lexa replied. He knew who we were the moment we entered. They approached his table, and Lexa noted how the human made no move to stand or salute, a breach of protocol that would earn any Skyran severe discipline. Instead, he simply watched them approach, one hand visible on the table, the other undoubtedly holding a weapon beneath. Commander Lexa Voran of the Skyran Elite Guard, she introduced herself formally. This is my first lieutenant, Kara Senvari. The human's lips curled slightly, not quite a smile. I know who you are. Question is, why are the Skyran tracking down a lone human mercenary? His voice was deeper than she expected, with a roughness that suggested it wasn't often used. May we join you? Lexa asked, though it wasn't really a question. Vane gestured to the empty chairs with his visible hand. Free station. As they sat, Lexa studied him more carefully. Humans were generally considered physically unimpressive by Skyren standards, but this specimen defied those expectations. Though seated, his frame suggested considerable strength, and the way he moved, economical, precise, spoke of extensive combat training. The visible scars on his hands and face weren't the marks of carelessness, but of survival. "We've heard impressive stories about you, Marcus Vane," Lexa began. "Most recently, your defense of the Cressida II mining colony against a Void Horde raiding party." "Not sure what you've heard," Vane replied evenly, "but I was just passing through. Right place, right time. 8 Horde vessels destroyed by a lone mercenary ship is not a matter of fortunate timing," Kara interjected skeptically. "Even for a Skyren battlecruiser, such odds would be challenging." Vane took a slow sip from his glass, his eyes never leaving them. The Horde relies on overwhelming force against defenseless targets. They're not used to someone who fights back effectively. Take away their numerical advantage, exploit their predictable attack formations, and they're not so formidable. Lexa leaned forward slightly. "You speak as if you've encountered them before." "More times than I'd like." Something dark flickered across his face. "They've been expanding their territory for the past 3 years. Your Skyren patrols can't be everywhere at once." "And what is your interest in combating them?" Lexa pressed. "Mercenaries typically require payment." Vane's expression hardened. "Let's just say the Horde and I have unfinished business." Before Lexa could probe further, a commotion erupted at the bar. 3 hulking Krolosians, reptilian mercenaries known for their volatile tempers, were harassing a slender Elysian server. One grabbed her arm roughly as she tried to move away. Lexa tensed, prepared to intervene if necessary, but before she could act, Vane was moving. She hadn't even seen him rise from his seat. One moment he was sitting, the next he was halfway across the room. What followed was a display of combat prowess that left even the Skyren warriors stunned. Vane moved with a fluid grace that seemed impossible for his species, disarming the first Krolosian with a precise strike to a nerve cluster that Lexa knew required intimate knowledge of reptilian physiology. The second attacker lunged with a vibro blade, only to find himself flipped over Vaughn's shoulder and slammed into a table with devastating force. The third Krolosian, wiser than his companions, drew a plasma pistol, only to freeze as the barrel of Vane's own weapon pressed against his temple. None of the Skyren had even seen him draw it. "The lady said no," Vane stated quietly, his voice barely audible across the now silent cantina. "I suggest you reconsider your evening plans." The Krolosian slowly lowered his weapon, backing away with a murderous glare that promised future retribution. Vane holstered his pistol with a practiced motion and returned to the table as if nothing had occurred, though Lexa noticed he positioned himself to keep the Krolosians in his peripheral vision. "Impressive," she acknowledged, genuinely meaning it. "Your combat style is unorthodox." "I adapt," Vane replied simply. "When you fight alone, you learn what works." "And why do you fight alone, Marcus Vane?" Kara asked, unable to hide her curiosity. Even the most accomplished Skyren warrior values the strength of her battle sisters. Something closed off in Vane's expression. "Teams can be liabilities." He finished his drink and stood. "If you're looking to hire me, Commander, the answer is no. I work alone." "Actually," Lexa said, rising to match him, "I have a proposition of a different nature. The Void Horde is preparing a major offensive against the Coreward colonies. Our intelligence suggests they've developed new weapons technology. We're gathering information before launching a counterstrike." "And?" Vane raised an eyebrow. "You have clearly encountered their forces multiple times and survived. Your tactical insights could be valuable." Vane studied her for a long moment. "What exactly are you suggesting, Commander?" "Join us for a reconnaissance mission to the Horde's forward operating base in the Erebus Nebula. Share your knowledge. In exchange, we offer Skyren protection protocols for your vessel and access to our weapons technology." The human's expression remained unreadable. "And if I refuse? Then we part ways," Lexa replied honestly. "But consider this. Alone, each of us may continue to win battles against the Horde. Together, we might have a chance to end their threat permanently." Vane's gaze shifted, taking in each of the Skyran warriors positioned around the cantina, assessing them with professional interest. Your warriors don't seem thrilled by the prospect of working with a human. They will follow orders, Lexa stated with absolute certainty. After a moment's consideration, Vane nodded. I'll consider your offer. Meet me at Docking Bay 94 tomorrow at Station Dawn. I'll give you my answer then. As he walked away, Kara moved to Lexa's side. Do you truly believe he will agree, Commander? Lexa watched the human's retreating form, noting how other patrons unconsciously moved aside, creating a path for him. Yes, she said finally. Because beneath all that carefully constructed indifference, I glimpsed something familiar in his eyes. What? Kara asked. The look of someone who has lost everything but the fight itself, Lexa replied quietly. The Void Horde took something from him, just as they have taken from us. The Skyran warriors gathered in Docking Bay 94 precisely at Station Dawn, their sleek combat armor gleaming under the artificial lights. Standing before them was Marcus Vane's ship, the Nemesis, and even the most skeptical among them couldn't help but regard it with professional interest. The vessel defied conventional design philosophies. Where Skyran ships featured elegant, predatory lines, the Nemesis was a patchwork of various technologies integrated with brutal efficiency. Its hull bore the scars of countless battles, some patches clearly salvaged from defeated enemies. What appeared at first glance to be structural flaws revealed themselves, upon closer inspection, to be deliberate design choices that would make the ship unpredictable in combat. It resembles a wounded animal, Saren observed disapprovingly. Perhaps, Kara replied, but wounded animals are often the most dangerous. The ship's loading ramp descended, and Marcus Vane emerged. He had traded his civilian attire for what was clearly his combat gear, a reinforced bodysuit of unknown material that seemed to shift slightly with his movements, absorbing and redistributing light in a way that would make him difficult to target. Various weapons and tools were integrated into the suit, and a tactical helmet hung from his belt. You came, Lexa noted, stepping forward. I considered your offer, Vane replied. It has merit. The Horde is gathering strength faster than either of us can counter alone. Then you'll join US? With conditions, Vane stated firmly. I maintain operational control of the Nemesis. I'll coordinate with your forces, but my ship, my command. Saren stepped forward, her golden eyes flashing with indignation. Unacceptable. No Skyran warrior takes orders from an outsider, much less I accept your terms, Lexa interrupted, silencing Saren with a sharp glance. However, I request that Lieutenant Kara and one technical specialist join you aboard the Nemesis to facilitate coordination. Vane's eyes narrowed slightly as he evaluated the request. Lieutenant Kara only. Your specialist can provide any technical information remotely. Lexa nodded, recognizing the compromise. Agreed. We depart in 1 hour. The Scimitar will lead, with the Nemesis following our jump signature. As the warriors dispersed to make final preparations, Kara approached Lexa privately. Commander, are you certain about this? Placing me on a human vessel. I need someone I trust to evaluate him, Lexa replied quietly. Observe everything. His tactics, his technology, his knowledge of the Horde. If he truly possesses the capabilities suggested by the reports, he could be invaluable to our efforts. And if the reports are exaggerated? Lexa's expression hardened. Then at least we'll know we're not overlooking a potential asset. The Void Horde grows stronger every cycle, Kara. We cannot afford to ignore any advantage, even one from an unexpected source. 1 hour later, the two vessels departed Nexus Station. The Scimitar, a sleek, predatory craft embodying centuries of Skyran military design, led the way, with the battle-scarred Nemesis following closely behind. Aboard the Nemesis, Kara found herself in surroundings unlike any she had experienced, where Skyran vessels featured biological interfaces grown to respond specifically to their users. Vane's ship was a hybrid of technologies from a dozen different worlds, modified and integrated with pragmatic brilliance. This navigation system, she noted, examining the main control console, it incorporates Tauren phase shift technology. How did you acquire it? Salvaged it from a derelict explorer vessel, Vane replied, running through pre-jump checks with practiced efficiency. Their navigational concepts were revolutionary, but their whole design couldn't handle the stress of rapid phase transitions. And you solved that problem? Vane gestured to a series of cylindrical devices mounted along the bulkheads. Gravitational harmonizers. They distribute the phase shift stress across the entire hull rather than just the transition points. Not elegant, but effective. Kara studied him with growing curiosity. You speak of complex astrogation principles as if they were common knowledge. I've had time to learn, he replied simply, offering no further explanation. They followed the scimitar through 3 consecutive jumps, using indirect routes to avoid potential Horde patrols. As they approached the outer boundary of the Erebus Nebula, Lexa's voice came through the comm system. All vessels, passive sensors only. The nebula interferes with long-range scans, which is why the Horde established their forward base here. We'll need to navigate visually once we enter the denser regions. Understood, Vane acknowledged, already adjusting his systems. Commander, recommend we separate and approach from different vectors. The Nemesis has adaptive camouflage that works effectively in nebular environments. There was a brief pause before Lexa responded. Proceed as suggested. Lieutenant Kara maintained communication protocols. As they entered the swirling clouds of the nebula, visibility rapidly decreased. Brilliant eddies of ionized gases swirled around them, creating a disorienting kaleidoscope of color and light. Kara watched as Vane navigated with confidence, occasionally adjusting course based on readings that seemed to make sense only to him. You've been here before, she observed. It wasn't a question. Once, he confirmed, not taking his eyes from the controls, followed a Horde raiding party back to their secondary staging area about 2 years ago. Alone? Kara couldn't keep the skepticism from her voice. Best way to gather intelligence without being detected. Before Kara could respond, proximity alarms blared throughout the ship. Vane immediately silenced them, his hands flying across the controls. Horde patrol, he stated, bringing up a tactical display. 2 cruisers, standard sweep pattern. Kara moved to the comm station. I'll alert the scimitar. Wait, Vane said sharply. Their patrol route will take them directly into the scimitar's approach vector. If we warn them now, the Horde will detect the transmission. We can't leave them blind, Kara protested. Vane studied the tactical display for a moment, then made a decision. We won't. He redirected power to the engines. We're going to draw their attention. Before Kara could object, the Nemesis surged forward, its adaptive hull plating shifting to a dull crimson that blended with the surrounding nebula. Vane piloted the ship directly toward the Horde patrol, but instead of attacking, he executed a series of maneuvers that seemed almost like deliberate near misses. What are you doing? Kara demanded. Creating a distraction, Vane replied calmly. The nebula distorts their sensors, but they'll register something large enough to investigate. When they change course to pursue us, it will clear the scimitar's path. As predicted, the Horde vessels altered course, moving to intercept what their sensors likely registered as an anomaly. Vane immediately changed direction, leading them deeper into the nebula, away from both the scimitar and the Horde base. Now we can warn your commander, he said, nodding to the comm station. Kara quickly sent an encrypted burst transmission, updating Lexa on their situation. The response came almost immediately. Continue diversion. We will proceed to the primary objective. Rendezvous at coordinates Delta 7 when clear. What followed was a masterclass in tactical evasion. Vane led the pursuing Horde vessels through increasingly dense regions of the nebula, using the Nemesis's superior maneuverability to stay just beyond their sensor range. At one point, he cut power to all systems except life support, allowing the ship to drift silently through a particularly dense gas cloud while the Horde cruisers thundered past, their powerful engines betraying their position. They rely too heavily on brute force, Vaughn explained quietly as they watched the cruisers disappear into the distance. Their sensors are powerful but crude. They look for energy signatures, weapon readiness, shield fluctuations, the markers of an opponent preparing to fight. They're not equipped to track a target that doesn't want to be found. You've studied them extensively, Kara observed. A shadow passed across Vane's face. Know your enemy, he said simply, bringing the Nemesis's systems back online. They rendezvoused with the scimitar at the designated coordinates, where Lexa reported successful reconnaissance of the Horde base. As they withdrew from the nebula to analyze their findings, the Nemesis suddenly shuddered violently. Proximity mine, Vane announced, scanning the damage reports. Clever. They seeded our exit vector while searching for us. Additional explosions flared around them as the scimitar also encountered the minefield. Alarms blared as both ships took damage. Scimitar to Nemesis, Lexa's voice came through, tense but controlled. Our primary drive is damaged. Switching to secondary systems. Negative, Commander, Vane replied, already analyzing the tactical display. The minefield was just the first layer, sensors showing multiple Horde vessels moving to intercept. They're using the mines to herd us toward their main force. There was a brief silence before Lexa responded. Assessment confirmed. Recommend immediate withdrawal using emergency jump protocols. The scimitar's damage makes that impossible, Vane countered. And the Nemesis won't leave you behind. This is not a matter for debate, mercenary, Lexa replied sharply. The intelligence we've gathered must reach the High Council. The mission takes priority over any individual vessel. With respect, Commander, Vane said, his tone hardening. I don't abandon people. We fight together, or not at all. Kara watched as Vane's demeanor transformed. Gone was the reserved mercenary, replaced by a battle commander who radiated absolute confidence. His hands flew over the controls, bringing weapon systems online and reconfiguring the ship's defensive capabilities. Lieutenant, he said to Kara, take the secondary weapons station. Target incoming ordnance, priority to anything heading for the scimitar's damage section. To her own surprise, Kara complied without hesitation, recognizing the voice of experience. Commander Lexa, Vane continued through the comm, I'm transmitting a tactical plan. The Nemesis will draw their initial fire. When they commit to pursuit, the scimitar will execute a pincer maneuver from Vector 37 Mark II. On the scimitar's bridge, Lexa reviewed the plan with growing astonishment. It was unorthodox, even reckless by Skyrim standards, but also brilliant. The human had identified weaknesses in the Horde formation that her own tactical systems had overlooked. Plan confirmed, Nemesis, she acknowledged. Executing in 3 standard minutes. What followed was a battle that would later be recounted in the halls of the Skyrim Citadel for generations to come. The damaged scimitar and the seemingly outmatched Nemesis engaged a Horde force 3 times their combined strength and emerged victorious. Vane piloted his vessel with impossible precision, executing maneuvers that strained the structural integrity of the ship to its limits. He seemed to anticipate the Horde's movements before they occurred, positioning the Nemesis to exploit gaps in their formation and creating opportunities for the scimitar to land devastating strikes. Most impressive to Kara was not just his skill, but his comprehensive understanding of both Skyrim and Horde capabilities. He leveraged the scimitar's superior targeting systems while compensating for its reduced maneuverability, all while exploiting the Horde's tendency to prioritize the most visible threat, in this case, his own vessel. When the last Horde ship retreated, the Nemesis was barely operational, multiple systems failing and hull breaches sealed by emergency force fields. The scimitar had fared little better, limping alongside as they made their way back toward safer space. In the aftermath, Lexa requested permission to board the Nemesis. When she arrived in what remained of the command center, she found Vane working tirelessly to repair critical systems, his hands moving with the same precision he'd demonstrated in combat. Your tactics were unconventional, she said by way of greeting. Vane didn't look up from his work, but effective. Yais. Lexa surveyed the damaged ship. You risked everything to ensure we both escaped. That's how it works when you fight alongside others, Vane replied, finally meeting her gaze. No one gets left behind. Something passed between them then, a moment of understanding between warriors who had stood together against impossible odds. The High Council will want a full report on this encounter, Lexa said. And on you, Marcus Vane. I'm not interested in becoming a subject of study, he replied warily. No, Lexa agreed, but perhaps you might consider becoming an ally. The journey back to Skyrim space was slow, both vessels operating on reduced power and makeshift repairs. During this time, a cautious respect began to develop between Vane and the Skyrim warriors, though Saren and several others maintained their distance. Those who had witnessed his actions in the battle, particularly those whose lives he had directly saved through his tactical decisions, began to regard him with a warrior's acknowledgement. Kara, having spent the most time with him aboard the Nemesis, found herself increasingly intrigued by the contradiction he presented. Here was a human who fought with the skill and precision of a seasoned Skyrim commander, yet employed tactics that would never be taught in their war academies. He was simultaneously disciplined and unpredictable, methodical yet intuitive. "Your people watch me as if I'm a puzzle to be solved," Vane observed as they worked together to repair a damaged power conduit. "You defy our understanding," Kara admitted. "Humans are not known as warriors among the galactic species. Maybe you've been meeting the wrong humans," he replied, a rare hint of humor in his voice. "Perhaps," she acknowledged. "Or perhaps you are exceptional even among your kind." Vane's expression shuddered suddenly, his focus returning to the repairs with renewed intensity. Kara had noticed this pattern. Any mention of his past or his uniqueness triggered an immediate withdrawal. When they finally reached the Skyrim outpost at Terrace Prime, Vane was summoned to a formal debriefing with the High Council representatives. He attended alone, declining Lexa's offer to accompany him. The session lasted for hours, and when he emerged, his expression was unreadable. "They wanted to know everything about my encounters with the Horde," he told Lexa later, as they stood on an observation deck overlooking the shipyards where both vessels were undergoing proper repairs. "My tactics, my technology, my sources of intelligence." "And did you tell Tathem?" Lexa asked. "I told them enough." He paused, watching a team of Skyrim engineers swarming over the Nemesis, studying its systems with professional curiosity. "They're not the first to question me, you know. The Ardelian Conclave, the Tauran Directorate, even the Human Coalition, they all wanted to understand how one ship, one person, could repeatedly engage Horde forces and survive." "And what did you tell them?" Vane turned to face her directly. "The same thing I told your council, that the Horde isn't invincible, that they have patterns, weaknesses, blind spots, that they can be beaten. Those are tactical observations," Lexa noted. "They don't explain you." A long silence stretched between them before Vane finally spoke again, his voice quieter. 10 years ago, I was a security officer on a human colony world called Elysium. Small place, just a few thousand people. Farmers, scientists, families. His gaze turned distant. The Horde came without warning. This was before they were widely known, before the major powers recognized the threat they posed. Lexa remained silent, recognizing the rarity of this moment. "I was off-world when they hit, escorting a supply transport," Vane continued. "When we returned, there was nothing left. No survivors, no distress calls. Just ashes." His hands gripped the railing. "The colonial authorities called it a tragedy. The Human Coalition classified it as an unfortunate first contact scenario. They offered condolences and moved on. But you didn't," Lexa observed quietly. "I couldn't." Vane's voice hardened. "I resigned my commission, sold everything I owned, and acquired the Nemesis, a decommissioned patrol vessel no one wanted. Spent 2 years modifying it, learning everything I could about ship systems, weapons technology, combat tactics. Then I went hunting. For revenge," Lexa said. "It wasn't a question." "At first," Vane acknowledged, "but I quickly realized that killing individual Horde raiders wouldn't change anything. I needed to understand them, their culture, their motivations, their strategies. So I became a shadow, following their movements, documenting their attacks, occasionally intervening when I could make a difference. And that's when the stories began," Lexa realized. "The lone mercenary appearing from nowhere to turn the tide of a hopeless battle." Vane nodded. "I never sought recognition. In fact, it complicated my work. But saving lives, it gave purpose to what I was doing. It made the losses meaningful." Lexa studied him with newfound curiosity. There was something in his eyes, a depth that seemed impossible for a species so short-lived as humans. The tactical brilliance he displayed, the reflexes that defied explanation, the intimate knowledge of technologies from a dozen worlds. None of it aligned with what the Skyran knew of human capabilities. "You're not telling me everything," she observed quietly. A ghost of a smile touched Vaughn's lips, there and gone in an instant. "No one ever tells everything, Commander." Before she could press further, a junior officer approached, saluting sharply. "Commander, your presence is requested in the council chamber immediately. They have reached a decision regarding the Horde intelligence and—" The officer hesitated, glancing at Vane. "Other matters." "I'll be there shortly," Lexa acknowledged. As the officer departed, she turned back to Vane. "You should join us." "Council chambers aren't really my environment," he replied, his expression guarded once more. "Nevertheless, their decision concerns you as well." She paused, studying him. "There are those among my people who believe you are more than you appear, Marcus Vane. The council has questions that I cannot answer." Something flickered in Vane's eyes, caution perhaps or resignation. "Questions always lead to more questions, Commander. It's a path with no end." "Perhaps," she conceded, "but sometimes the journey matters more than the destination." The council chamber was a stark contrast to the utilitarian efficiency that characterized most Skyran military installations. Ancient tapestries depicting legendary battles hung from the curved walls, and the central table, carved from a single piece of rare crimson heartwood, bore the scars of countless centuries. Around it sat the 7 members of the High Council, their ceremonial armor glinting in the subdued light. Elder Matriarch Katal, her silver hair elaborately braided to display her house's honored history, raised an eyebrow as Vane entered behind Lexa and Kara. "We did not request the human's presence," she observed coolly. "I invited him," Lexa replied, "as the matters we discuss concern him directly." The matriarch studied Vane for a long moment before inclining her head slightly. "Very well. Let us proceed." Elder Strategist Naira, the youngest of the council members yet perhaps the most feared for her brilliant tactical mind, activated a holographic display in the center of the table. A 3-dimensional map of the sector appeared, with numerous red markers indicating Horde activity. "The intelligence you gathered confirms our worst fears," she began. "The Void Horde is massing for a major offensive against the core word systems. Their new weapons technology, phase-shifted plasma torpedoes, could penetrate our defensive shields. If they succeed—" "They won't," Vane interrupted, earning shocked looks from several council members. Interrupting an elder was considered a grave insult among the Skyran. Before anyone could reprimand him, Vane stepped forward and manipulated the holographic display with practiced ease. The map zoomed in on a specific region of the Erebus Nebula. "Your reconnaissance was thorough but incomplete," he stated. "The Horde's main fleet isn't here." He indicated the location they had scouted. "That's a decoy base, designed to draw your attention. Their actual staging area is here." His fingers traced a path deeper into the nebula, to a region that appeared empty on the map. Elder Tactician Vera leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "How could you possibly know this?" "Because I've been tracking their movements for years," Vane replied. "The Horde operates on a predictable cycle of deception. They never launch major operations from visible forward bases." "Preposterous," scoffed Elder Curator Celine. "Our intelligence network is the most sophisticated in the sector. If such a base existed, we would know." Vane's expression remained calm. "Your network relies on established patterns and protocols. The Horde knows this. They've been feeding you selective information, guiding your observations toward conclusions they want you to reach." A tense silence fell over the chamber. The accusation that the legendary Skyran intelligence apparatus had been manipulated was not just shocking, it was potentially treasonous. "You dare suggest that our most sacred systems have been compromised?" Elder Protector Thorn growled, her hand instinctively moving to the ceremonial blade at her side. "I'm suggesting," Vane replied evenly, "that your enemies understand you better than you think. They study your patterns just as you study theirs." Lexa stepped forward. "Council members, I have witnessed firsthand this human's understanding of Horde tactics. His insights proved invaluable during our mission. I believe his assessment warrants investigation." Elder Matriarch Katal raised a hand, silencing the murmurs that had broken out. Human, she addressed Vane directly. If what you claim is true, why share this information with us now? Why not use it to your own advantage? Because I can't stop the Horde alone, Vane answered simply. No one can. This isn't about individual victories anymore, it's about survival. The council members exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. Finally, Katal nodded. We will dispatch scout vessels to verify this information, she declared. If your assessment proves correct, the Skyren will be in your debt, Marcus Vane. I don't want debt, Vane replied. I want action. The Horde will launch their offensive in less than 3 standard days. By the time your scouts report back and you mobilize your fleet, it will be too late. Strategist Naira's eyes widened slightly. 3 days? Our intelligence suggested at least 2 weeks of preparation remained. Your intelligence is compromised, Vaughn repeated firmly. You need to strike now, while they're still consolidating their forces. With what? Tactician Vera demanded. Our main battle fleet is positioned to defend the Coreward approach. Even if we believed you, which I do not, we cannot redeploy our forces quickly enough. You don't need the main fleet, Vane stated. A surgical strike force could cripple their command structure before the offensive begins. Impossible, Vera dismissed. Even our elite strike teams would need significant support to penetrate a Horde staging area. Not if they had the right guide, Vane countered, his gaze steady. I know their security protocols, their sensor blind spots, their communication cycles. I can get a small team into their command center. The council chamber erupted into a cacophony of voices, some outraged at the audacity of the suggestion, others considering its merits. Through it all, Lexa observed Vane, noting the absolute conviction in his stance. He wasn't bluffing or exaggerating. He truly believed what he was proposing was possible. Elder Matriarch Katal silenced the chamber once more. This is an unprecedented situation, she acknowledged. Commander Lexa, your assessment? All eyes turned to Lexa. Her response would likely determine not just the Council's decision, but the fate of countless lives across the sector. I believe him, she stated firmly, and I volunteer to lead the strike force. Katal studied her for a long moment before turning her gaze to Vane. Human, you claim knowledge that should be impossible for your kind to possess. Our biological records indicate that humans lack both the lifespan and neural capacity to accumulate and process the level of tactical expertise you have demonstrated. Therefore, you are either lying or you are not what you appear to be. A heavy silence fell over the chamber. Vane's expression remained carefully neutral, but Lexa detected a subtle shift in his posture, a readiness for conflict. What I am, he said finally, is someone offering you a chance to stop a catastrophe before it begins. Take it or leave it, but decide quickly. Time is running out. Before Katal could respond, alarms blared throughout the outpost. The holographic display in the center of the table automatically shifted to external sensors, showing multiple vessels dropping out of hyperspace near the station. Horde vessels, Tactician Vera exclaimed, rising to her feet. How did they find us? This outpost's location is classified at the highest level. Vane moved immediately to the display, analyzing the incoming data. It's a hunter-killer squad, 7 vessels, heavily armed. They're here for me. For you? Curator Celine demanded. Why would the Horde commit resources to pursue a single human? Because I'm not just any human, Vane replied grimly. I've been disrupting their operations for years. They've put a significant bounty on my head. The station shuddered as the first volley of enemy fire impacted the outer defensive shields. Defensive protocols activated, reported a junior officer from a communication station, but our combat vessels are still undergoing repairs, including the Scimitar. We cannot mount an effective counterattack. The Nemesis can fly, Vane stated. I can draw them away from the station. That's suicide, Kara objected. Your ship is barely operational. It's operational enough, Vaughn countered. And I know these hunter-killer squads. They're single-minded. They'll pursue their primary target and ignore everything else. Another impact rocked the station, more violent than the first. Warning indicators flashed across the tactical display as shield capacity dropped to 70%. Our defensive shields cannot withstand sustained bombardment from 7 warships, strategist Naira warned. We must evacuate essential personnel. There's no time, Lexa stated. She turned to Vane. If you truly can draw them away, do it, but not alone. She faced the council. I request permission to accompany him aboard the Nemesis. If we survive, we can proceed with the strike against the Horde staging area, as discussed. Katal hesitated for only a moment before nodding. Permission granted. Lieutenant Kara, you will join them. The rest of the elite squad will prepare for the potential strike mission. I work alone, Vane began, but Lexa cut him off. Not anymore, she stated firmly. We fight together or not at all. His own words thrown back at him seemed to give Vaughn pause. After a brief moment, he nodded. We need to move quickly. Follow me. As they raced through the corridors toward the docking bay, the station continued to shudder under enemy fire. Damage reports echoed through the communication system, indicating breaches in the outer sections. Personnel scrambled to emergency stations, many casting wary or hopeful glances at the unusual trio, a human and two elite Skyran warriors running side by side. They reached the Nemesis to find a small team of Skyran engineers still working frantically on its systems. Status? Vane demanded, as he reached the loading ramp. The lead engineer looked up, surprised to be addressed directly by the human. Primary systems at 60% capacity, shield generators operational but compromised. Weapons systems functional but power distribution is unstable. It'll do, Vane decided, motioning for Lexa and Kara to board. Clear the area. We're launching immediately. The engineers quickly gathered their equipment and evacuated the docking bay. As the trio reached the command center of the Nemesis, Vane immediately began the launch sequence, his hands flying over the controls with practiced efficiency. Commander, he said to Lexa, take the tactical station. Lieutenant, man the secondary weapons array. Both warriors moved to their assigned positions without hesitation, quickly familiarizing themselves with the hybrid controls. The ship's interfaces adapt to the user, Vane explained briefly. Think of what you need, and the system will configure accordingly. Sure enough, Lexa found the tactical display shifting subtly, the alien symbols transforming into configurations that seemed intuitively familiar to her. It was technology unlike anything in the Skyran arsenal, more advanced, more responsive. Launching now, Vane announced. Station control, this is Nemesis. Open emergency bay doors and drop local shields for our departure. The docking bay doors slid open, revealing the chaotic scene outside. The Horde vessels were maintaining a strategic formation, rotating their attack vectors to systematically weaken the station's shields. As the Nemesis emerged from the bay, the enemy ships immediately detected the new target. They've spotted us, Kara reported, watching the sensor readings. 3 vessels breaking formation to intercept. Only T3, Vane noted with a grim smile. They're getting cautious. Broadcasting identification signal now. He activated a transmission that pulsed from the Nemesis on a specific frequency. Almost immediately, all 7 Horde vessels altered course, abandoning their attack on the station to pursue the smaller ship. What did you just do? Lexa demanded. Let them know exactly who they're chasing, Vane replied, executing a series of evasive maneuvers as enemy fire began to streak past them. Hold on. This is going to get interesting. What followed was a display of piloting skill that left even the seasoned Skyran warriors impressed. Vane guided the damaged Nemesis through a series of impossible turns and accelerations, somehow anticipating the Horde's firing patterns and avoiding the majority of their attacks. When hits did land, he rotated the ship's shields to distribute the impact, preventing any single section from failing completely. We need to reach the Kelsos asteroid field, he announced, indicating a dense cluster of space debris ahead. Once there, we can use the gravitational distortions to mask our energy signature and slip away. The Horde vessels are faster, Kara observed, firing the secondary weapons to intercept incoming torpedoes. They'll overtake us before we reach the field. Then we need to slow them down, Vane replied. Commander, there's a sequence of commands on your tactical display. Execute when ready. Lexa quickly reviewed the proposed tactical sequence, her eyes widening slightly. This will drain our remaining shield power. Yes, Vane confirmed. But it will buy us the time we need. Trusting his judgment, Lexa executed the command sequence. The Nemesis shuddered as power was diverted from shields to a previously dormant system. A pulse of energy erupted from the ship's stern, expanding rapidly into a field of glittering particles that engulfed the pursuing Horde vessels. Quantum disruptor field, Vane explained as he pushed the engines to maximum. Temporarily interferes with their drive systems. It won't stop them, but it will slow them down. Sure enough, the Horde vessels' pursuit faltered as their engines struggled to maintain power through the disruptive field. The Nemesis surged ahead, reaching the edge of the asteroid field with a narrow lead. As they navigated the treacherous debris, Lexa studied Vane with renewed interest. The technology he employed, quantum disruptors, adaptive interfaces, predictive targeting systems, was beyond even Skyran capabilities. No human should have access to such advanced systems, let alone the knowledge to integrate and operate them effectively. You still haven't answered the matriarch's question, she noted, as they penetrated deeper into the asteroid field. What are you, Marcus Vane? Vane's hands remained steady on the controls, but a tension crept into his shoulders. For a moment it seemed he might continue to deflect, but then the Nemesis shuddered violently as a Horde torpedo detonated nearby, sending a shower of asteroid fragments against their hull. Hull breach in Section 7, Kara reported, quickly rerouting power to emergency force fields. The ship lurched again as more impacts registered. Through the view screen, they could see 3 Horde vessels had managed to follow them into the asteroid field, their heavier armor allowing them to plow through debris that the Nemesis had to carefully navigate around. We can't outrun them in here, Lexa assessed, watching the tactical display. And we can't outfight them with our compromised systems. No, Vane agreed grimly. We can't. He took a deep breath, seeming to come to a decision. But I can. Without warning, he locked the ship's controls and rose from his seat. Moving to a secured panel at the rear of the command center, he placed his palm against a biometric scanner. The panel slid open, revealing a compartment containing what appeared to be a specialized suit of armor, unlike anything the Skyran had ever seen. What is that? Kara demanded. Something I hoped I wouldn't need to use, Vane replied, already beginning to don the armor. It flowed around him almost organically, components self-assembling and connecting with precision. The autopilot will guide the ship to these coordinates. He entered a sequence into his console. It's a secure location, you'll be safe there. You're leaving the ship? Lexa realized, stunned. How? We're in the middle of an asteroid field under attack. As the final pieces of the armor locked into place, Vane turned to face them. The suit was a masterpiece of technology, sleek, almost predatory in design, with subtle energy patterns flowing beneath its surface. The helmet materialized around his head, forming a seamless connection with the rest of the armor. I'm going to end this pursuit. His voice came through, slightly altered by the helmet's systems. Once and for all. Before either Skyran could respond, Vane moved to an airlock chamber adjacent to the command center. As the inner door sealed behind him, Lexa lunged for the control panel. This is madness, she shouted through the communication system. No human could survive direct exposure to space, let alone combat in these conditions. Through the chamber's viewport, they could see Vane's helmeted face. For the first time since they'd met him, he smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his features. You're right, Commander. His voice came through the comm. No human could. With that enigmatic statement, he triggered the outer airlock door. Instead of being violently expelled into space as physics demanded, Vane launched himself with controlled precision, the armor's propulsion system activating to guide his trajectory directly toward the nearest Horde vessel. Lexa and Kara watched in stunned disbelief as the tiny figure streaked across the void, somehow navigating between asteroid fragments with impossible precision. The Horde vessels, equally confused by this unexpected tactic, briefly ceased fire on the Nemesis as they tried to track and target the rapidly moving armored figure. What manner of technology is this? Kara whispered, watching as Vane reached the hull of the lead Horde ship and attached himself to its surface. Lexa had no answer. They could only observe as Vaughn methodically moved across the enemy vessel's hull, occasionally disappearing from view only to reappear moments later. Suddenly, the Horde ship's engines flared erratically, and its weapons systems went offline. He's disabling it from the outside, Lexa realized, watching the tactical display as the enemy vessel's systems failed one by one. Before the remaining Horde ships could respond, Vane launched himself toward the second vessel, repeating the process with even greater efficiency. As the second ship began to drift, power failing across all systems, the third vessel attempted to retreat, abandoning its companions to save itself. Vane pursued relentlessly, overtaking the fleeing vessel with a burst of speed that no conventional propulsion system could achieve. This time, instead of methodically disabling systems, he appeared to target a specific section of the hull. A bright flash erupted from his position, and a moment later, the Horde ship's bridge section exploded outward, venting atmosphere and debris into space. By the first warriors, Kara breathed. He's boarding them, fighting them directly. Minutes later, all three Horde vessels drifted powerless in the asteroid field. The Nemesis's sensors detected a single life form moving back toward them, Vane, propelling himself through space with the same impossible grace. He re-entered through the same airlock, the armor retracting from his body as the chamber repressurized. When he stepped back into the command center, his expression was once again carefully neutral, though a hint of resignation remained in his eyes. "The other 4 vessels have broken off pursuit," he reported calmly, returning to the pilot's seat as if nothing extraordinary had occurred. "They'll report back to their command structure, but we've bought ourselves some time." Lexa and Kara stared at him in shocked silence. Finally, Lexa found her voice. "What are you?" she asked again, but this time there was no accusation in her tone, only wonder. Vane's fingers paused over the controls. For a long moment he said nothing, his gaze fixed on the starfield beyond the view screen. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, almost reflective. "I told you about the colony, Elysium. What I didn't tell you was that it wasn't just any colony. It was a research outpost, studying ancient technology found in that sector, technology left behind by a civilization that predated all of our species." He turned to face them, his blue eyes containing depths that suddenly seemed ageless. "I wasn't just a security officer. I was one of the research subjects. The scientists were studying how this technology interfaced with different species. Humans showed a unique compatibility. Our neural pathways adapted more readily than other species. I volunteered for the most extensive integration program." "Integration?" Kara echoed, trying to comprehend the implications. "The technology doesn't just interface with the user, it bonds at a cellular level, restructuring neural pathways, enhancing biological processes, extending lifespans," Vane explained. "I was still undergoing the process when the Horde attacked. They weren't there by accident. They came specifically for the technology. And they found you instead," Lexa realized. Vane nodded. "The integration process activated fully during the attack, a survival response. When I returned and found the colony destroyed, I discovered I had changed, enhanced strength, accelerated healing, neural processing capabilities beyond human limitations, and an instinctive understanding of the ancient technology." "So you're not human anymore?" Kara asked. "I'm still human," Vane replied firmly. "Just augmented. The Horde has been hunting me ever since. Not for revenge, but because I represent the most successful integration of the technology they're desperate to acquire." "And your crusade against them?" Lexa inquired. "Began as vengeance, yes, but evolved into something else." Vane's expression hardened. "The Horde doesn't just raid and pillage. They're seeking specific technologies throughout the galaxy, pieces of the same ancient civilization that was studied on Elysium. If they manage to gather enough of it, to understand how to use it, they could become unstoppable," Lexa finished, understanding dawning in her eyes. "Now you know why I've been fighting alone all these years," Vane said quietly, "and why I've kept my true nature hidden. Knowledge of what I am would make me a target for every power in the galaxy, not just the Horde." Lexa considered this revelation, understanding how it explains so many of the contradictions they had observed. His tactical brilliance, his technological prowess, his combat abilities, all enhanced beyond normal human limitations. "Does this change your proposal regarding the strike on the Horde staging area?" she asked finally. Vane studied her with newfound respect. Where most would have reacted with fear or greed to his revelation, her first concern remained the mission. "No," he answered. In fact, it makes it more viable. With your elite warriors and my capabilities, we have a genuine chance of success. Then that remains our priority, Lexa decided. Lieutenant Kara, set course back to the outpost. We need to report the neutralization of the immediate threat and prepare the strike team. As Kara moved to comply, Lexa turned back to Vaughn. The council will demand answers. I know, he acknowledged, but we don't have time for their deliberations. The window for striking the Horde staging area is closing rapidly. Lexa nodded, a plan forming in her mind. Then we won't give them time to deliberate. We'll present the facts along with a prepared strike plan. The matriarch is pragmatic enough to recognize necessity when it stares her in the face. For the first time, a genuine smile appeared on Vane's face, transforming his features from those of a hardened warrior to something more human, despite everything he had revealed about himself. Now who's being unconventional, Commander? He asked with a hint of admiration. I learned quickly, she replied, the ghost of a smile touching her own lips. Especially from those with much to teach. The return to the Skyran outpost was met with astonishment. Reports of a single human exiting a spaceship to neutralize 3 Horde vessels had already spread through the ranks, evolving with each retelling. Some claimed he had torn through the enemy hulls with his bare hands. Others insisted he had manipulated gravity itself to crush the ships. The truth, while less mythical, was impressive enough. The council chamber was crowded when they arrived. Beyond the 7 elders, dozens of high-ranking warriors had assembled, their curiosity overcoming protocol. Whispers fell silent as Vane entered alongside Lexa and Kara. Elder Matriarch Katal regarded them with calculating eyes. Reports of your tactics against the Horde pursuit vessels are difficult to believe, human. Yet they are accurate, Lexa interjected before Vane could respond. I witnessed it myself, and I have also been made aware of the full nature of our ally. Vane shot her a surprised glance which she met with steady resolve. Secrets have their place in war, Lexa continued, addressing the council, but so does trust. Marcus Vane has entrusted us with knowledge that places him at risk. He has fought alone for years against the same enemy that threatens us all. Now he offers us a chance to strike a decisive blow. She stepped forward, activating the holographic display to show the true location of the Horde staging area. This is our target, a hidden base deep in the Erebus Nebula, where the Horde is massing for a major offensive. They believe their location remains secure, giving us a critical element of surprise. And you propose what exactly? Strategist Naira asked, studying the display with professional interest. A surgical strike, Vaughn answered, stepping forward. A small team infiltrates the command center while a diversionary force engages their perimeter defenses. We disable their leadership structure and targeting systems, leaving their fleet blind and disorganized. With what forces? Tactician Vera demanded. Our main fleet is positioned to defend the coreward approaches. We don't need the main fleet, Lexa asserted. The Scimitar and a single squadron of strike vessels can provide the necessary diversion. The infiltration team will be small, my elite warriors, plus Vane. Murmurs of surprise swept through the chamber. A Skyran commander proposing to fight alongside a human was unprecedented. And why should we trust this plan? Curator Celine challenged. Hours ago, we knew nothing of this true staging area. Now we are asked to commit precious resources based solely on this human's word. Not solely, came a new voice. Lieutenant Saren stepped forward from among the assembled warriors. Her expression remained stern, but something had changed in her demeanor. I volunteered to verify the human's claim. While you deliberated, I took a scout vessel to the coordinates he provided. She activated her own data sphere, projecting images that confirmed Vane's intelligence. The Horde presence was massive, dozens of warships arrayed around a central command structure hidden deep within the nebula's swirling gases. The human spoke truly, Saren concluded, her golden eyes meeting Vane's blue ones with newfound respect. And I request permission to join the infiltration team. A stunned silence fell over the chamber. Saren had been among the most vocal critics of involving the human in Skyran affairs. Her endorsement carried significant weight. Elder Matriarch Katal studied each face before her. Lexa's determined confidence. Vane's quiet resolve, Saren's surprising support, and the gathered warriors' growing acceptance. Finally, she nodded. "Prepare your strike force, Commander. You depart in 3 hours." The preparations were a blur of activity. The scimitar, hastily repaired, would lead the diversionary attack alongside 5 strike falcons, nimble vessels designed for rapid assault. The infiltration team, composed of Lexa, Vane, Kara, Saren, and 4 elite warriors, would approach separately in the Nemesis, using its adaptive camouflage to penetrate the Horde's perimeter undetected. As they made final preparations, Vane found himself surrounded by warriors who, days earlier, would have regarded him with suspicion or disdain. Now they approached with questions about his tactics, his experiences fighting the Horde, even his unusual armor. "Your integration with the ancient technology," Kara asked as they checked weapon systems aboard the Nemesis. "Does it hurt?" Vane paused, considering the question. "Not anymore. In the beginning, it was uncomfortable. My body and mind were adapting to something fundamentally alien. Now it feels like a part of me. And it gives you greater strength, enhanced reflexes," she noted. "Like our evolutionary adaptations, but compressed into a single lifetime." "Something like that," Vane agreed. "Though there are limits. I'm not invulnerable." "Few worthy adversaries are," came Lexa's voice as she entered the weapons bay. "The greatest warriors acknowledge their limitations and fight despite them." She handed Vane a sleek, angular weapon, clearly of Skyren design, yet modified. "Our engineers studied the technology in your ship," she explained. "This pulse rifle has been calibrated to your unique neural patterns. It should respond more efficiently than standard weapons." Vane accepted the gift with genuine surprise. "I thank you, Commander." "Lexa," she corrected. "Those who fight at my side use my name." Their eyes met, an unspoken understanding passing between them. In the days since their first encounter, something had fundamentally shifted. Respect had evolved into trust, and trust into something neither had anticipated, a connection that transcended species and backgrounds. The moment was interrupted as Saren entered, already equipped for battle. "Final preparations are complete. The diversion force awaits your command." The attack unfolded with precision. The scimitar and its accompanying strike falcons emerged from hyperspace at the outer perimeter of the nebula, immediately engaging the Horde's defensive pickets with overwhelming force. Alarms blared throughout the enemy fleet as vessels scrambled to respond to the unexpected assault. Meanwhile, the Nemesis approached from a different vector, its hull shifting to match the surrounding nebular gases. Vane guided the ship through gaps in the Horde's sensor network, exploiting blind spots that only his enhanced perception could identify. "Approaching insertion point," he announced quietly as they neared the massive central structure. "Defense systems active but focused outward. We have a window." Lexa nodded. "Infiltration team, final checks." The warriors verified their weapons and armor, each movement efficient and precise. They had trained together for years, but never for a mission like this. They would be the first Skyren in history to directly infiltrate a Horde command center. The Nemesis docked silently at an emergency access port, its systems interfacing with the Horde vessel to mask their presence. As the airlock cycled, Vane activated his armor, the sleek material flowing around him with organic precision. "Stay close," he instructed. "Their internal security operates on rotating frequencies. We'll have approximately 3 minutes between patrol cycles." Lexa signaled her understanding. Warriors, formation Cavex, Kara point, Saren, rear guard. They moved like shadows through the Horde vessel, Vane's enhanced senses alerting them to patrols before they appeared. When confrontation was unavoidable, the team struck with devastating efficiency, Skyren combat precision complemented by Vane's augmented abilities. The command center lay at the heart of the structure, protected by multiple security barriers. As they approached the final checkpoint, Vane held up a hand. "Something's wrong," he whispered. "The security protocols have changed." Lexa tensed. "A T-trap? Possibly. Or they've implemented new systems since my last intelligence gathering." Saren moved forward, examining the security barrier with practiced eyes. "This configuration is familiar. We encountered similar protocols during the Krallian campaign." There's a recursive element to the authentication sequence. Vane studied her work with growing respect. You're right. If we can identify the base algorithm, together, they work to decrypt the security system. Vane's technology-enhanced mind complementing Saren's analytical training. Within minutes, they had created a bypass sequence. That should grant us access, Vane confirmed, but they'll detect the intrusion within seconds. Then we move fast, Lexa decided. All warriors prepare for direct engagement. Our objective remains the command nexus. Neutralize all resistance. The doors slid open, and they surged forward into the heart of the enemy stronghold. The Horde commanders, massive, armored figures from a species the Skyran had rarely seen up close, reacted with shock to the sudden infiltration. Their confusion quickly turned to rage as they recognized Vane among the attackers. The Integrated One bellowed a hulking figure at the central control station, at last. What followed was combat at its most intense and beautiful, a deadly dance between the Skyran warriors and Horde commanders. Lexa moved with lethal grace, her pulse blade, carving through enemy armor with precision strikes. Kara and Saren fought back to back, their complementary styles creating an impenetrable defense while they systematically eliminated targets. Vane confronted the central commander directly, his augmented abilities matching the Horde leader's brute strength. As they fought, the commander's intentions became clear. Your integration is incomplete, he growled in heavily accented common speech. The technology you carry could elevate our entire species. Why resist your destiny as our greatest weapon? Because some things are not meant to be weapons, Vane replied, countering a powerful blow. The ancients created this technology to preserve life, not destroy it. Their battle carried them across the command platform, damaging critical systems in the process. Warning klaxons blared as the vessel's automated protocols detected the threat to essential functions. Targeting systems compromised, Kara reported, having fought her way to a control station. Their fleet is receiving corrupted command signals. The diversion force is pressing their advantage, Saren added, monitoring communications. The Horde fleet is in disarray. Lexa dispatched her opponent with a final strike, turning to witness Vane's continuing battle with the central commander. Despite his enhanced abilities, the Horde leader's massive strength was taking a toll. A powerful blow sent Vane crashing into a control console, his armor absorbing damage that would have killed an unaugmented human instantly. Without hesitation, Lexa leaped to his aid, her pulse blade finding a gap in the commander's armor. The massive figure roared in pain, turning to face this new threat. The momentary distraction was all Vane needed. With precise timing, he directed a surge of energy through his armor into the damaged console, creating a feedback loop that overloaded the command center's primary systems. Central core destabilizing, he announced, rising to his feet. This entire structure will begin to collapse in minutes. Time to leave, Lexa ordered. All warriors, extraction pattern Delta. Back to the Nemesis. As they fought their way back through the increasingly chaotic vessel, emergency systems failing around them, the Horde commander's words echoed in Vane's mind. The integration was incomplete, a fact he had long suspected but never fully understood. The technology within him was still evolving, still adapting to his human physiology. They reached the Nemesis just as the Horde command structure began to break apart. Vane piloted them away from the disintegrating vessel, navigating through debris and disabled enemy ships. Around them, the diversion force pressed its advantage, the Skyran vessels executing precision strikes against a fleet now left without central coordination. We did it, Kara breathed, watching as the Horde staging area collapsed into chaos. Their offensive is neutralized. More than that, Lexa observed. We've struck at their command hierarchy. It will take them years to recover from this blow. Vane said nothing, his focus on guiding the Nemesis back to the rendezvous point. The battle had taken more from him than the others realized. His integration with the ancient technology was pushing boundaries he had never tested before. As they docked with the scimitar at the designated coordinates, Vane finally relaxed his grip on the controls. The mission was a success beyond any of their expectations. The Horde fleet was scattered, their leadership structure decimated, their carefully planned offensive in ruins. You should rest, Lexa said quietly, noting his exhaustion. Your body has endured significant stress. I'm fine, he insisted, though the fatigue in his voice betrayed him. Even augmented humans have limits, she replied with unexpected gentleness. As you once told me, knowing one's limitations is part of being a warrior. A small smile touched his lips. Using my own words against me seems to be becoming a habit, Commander. Lexa, she corrected again, her golden eyes meeting his. And yes, it is. The return to the Skyrim outpost was triumphant. The successful strike against the Horde staging area had averted a catastrophic offensive and dealt the enemy a blow from which they would not quickly recover. News of the victory spread rapidly through Skyrim space, along with tales of the human who had fought alongside their greatest warriors. In the council chamber, Elder Matriarch Katal formally acknowledged the achievement. The Skyrim honor those who stand against darkness, regardless of origin, she declared, her ancient eyes resting on Vayne. You have earned a place among our greatest allies, Marcus Vayne. The assembled warriors struck their chests in salute, a gesture typically reserved for their own kind. The significance was not lost on Vana, who returned the gesture with perfect form. The alliance between us need not end with this victory, Katal continued. The High Council proposes a more permanent arrangement. Join us as an advisor on Horde tactics and technology. Help us prepare for the battles yet to come. Vayne hesitated, his gaze moving to Lexa, who stood at attention among her warriors. For 10 years he had fought alone, carrying the burden of his unique nature in isolation. The prospect of finding a place among these warriors, people who now accepted him despite knowing what he was tempting beyond words. I am honored by your offer, he began carefully. But my path has always been that of the scout, the vanguard. I can serve the Alliance better by continuing to track Horde movements, gathering intelligence that even your best operatives cannot access. A murmur of disappointment rippled through the chamber, but Katal nodded in understanding. Then we propose a compromise. You will maintain your independence, but with the full support of the Skyrim Elite Guard. Resources, intelligence, safe harbors throughout our territory, all will be at your disposal. And, Lexa added, stepping forward, a direct liaison to coordinate your efforts with our forces. Vayne's eyes narrowed slightly. And who would this liaison be? Someone familiar with your unconventional tactics? Lexa replied, the ghost of a smile touching her lips. Someone who has fought at your side and earned your trust. Understanding dawned in his eyes. You're volunteering. Unless you object, she replied evenly, though something in her golden eyes suggested she would not easily accept refusal. For the first time in years, Vayne felt a weight lifting from his shoulders, the burden of solitude that had been his constant companion since Elysium. To have an ally who understood both his mission and his nature, who could fight beside him as an equal. I would welcome the company, he said simply, his voice betraying more emotion than he had intended. Elder Matriarch Katal observed the exchange with ancient wisdom in her eyes. Then it is settled. Commander Lexa will serve as liaison between the Skyrim High Council and our new ally. Together, you will continue the fight against the Void Horde, ensuring that what happened at Elysium never occurs again. 3 months later, the Nemesis drifted in orbit around a remote planet at the edge of charted space. Its hull, once battle-scarred and patched with mismatched plates, now gleamed with new armor, a hybrid of Skyrim bioorganic materials, and Vayne's own adaptive technology. On the observation deck, Vayne stood beside Lexa, watching the twin suns set over the planet's pristine oceans. Since their alliance had been formalized, they had conducted 3 successful operations against Horde outposts, each one further diminishing the enemy's presence in the sector. The Council reports that 6 more systems have joined the alliance, Lexa noted, reviewing data on a holographic display. Your reputation precedes us, it seems. Our reputation, Vaughn corrected. The Skyrim warriors made quite an impression during the last engagement. Lexa deactivated the display, turning to face him fully. There's something I've been meaning to ask you. Something that's troubled me since the battle at the Horde Command Center. Vayne tensed slightly. What is it? The commander said your integration was incomplete, she reminded him. What did he mean? For a moment Vayne said nothing, his gaze returning to the sunset beyond the view screen. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than usual. The technology I carry, it's evolving, adapting. The scientists on Elysium believed it was designed to respond to its users' needs and experiences, becoming whatever was necessary for survival. And what is necessary for your survival now? Lexa asked perceptively. Vane turned to her, a rare vulnerability in his eyes. For 10 years, survival meant isolation, fighting alone, staying ahead of those who would use what I've become for their own purposes. But now? She prompted when he fell silent. Now I'm beginning to think survival might mean something different. Connection. Purpose beyond the next battle. A future worth fighting for, not just enemies worth fighting against. Lexa stepped closer, her golden eyes searching his. And has the technology responded to this? Evolution in your thinking? Yes, he admitted. I've noticed changes. The armor adapts more readily. The neural enhancements are more intuitive. It's as if the integration is progressing beyond mere combat applications. Toward what end? I don't know, Vane confessed. But for the first time since Elysium, I'm curious to find out, not afraid. Lexa's hand moved to rest on his arm, a gesture of connection that would have been unthinkable months ago. Then we will discover the answer together, as warriors do when facing the unknown. Vane covered her hand with his own, feeling the strength in her grip and offering his in return. Together, he agreed. Beyond the view screen, the second sun finally dipped below the horizon, casting the observation deck in the soft glow of starlight. In the vast darkness between those distant points of light, the void horde still lurked, still threatened. But they were no longer facing a lone warrior or an isolated species. They were facing an alliance forged in battle and strengthened by understanding, Skyren and human, conventional and extraordinary, united in common purpose. And in that unity lay a power greater than any ancient technology or battle fleet, the power of warriors who had found in each other not just allies, but a home. As the Nemesis banked away from the planet, setting course for their next mission, Vane allowed himself a moment of hope, a feeling he had nearly forgotten in his years of solitary battle. The path ahead remained dangerous, the enemy still formidable. But for the first time, he was not walking that path alone, and somehow, that made all the difference.